Pressure monsters. These little demons are what makes the game scary, and maybe a little annoying to some of us. They're the main threat in this game, and they can appear at the most random moment and catch you off guard. Every monster has its own rarity. Some can spawn pretty frequently, and some of them, almost never spawn. So today I'll be talking about every single monster in the game and how rare each of them are. Even some that are unused. I know that has absolutely nothing to do with rarity, but just roll with it, okay? I'll be going in an order from the most common monsters to the absolute rarest monsters. Ones that you'll probably never gonna end up encountering. Anyways, enjoy the video. Starting things off with the two most common monsters in the game. The puddles of void mass and squiddles. These guys are most likely the first entities you'll encounter while playing. In case you somehow don't know how to avoid them, which I'm sure 99% of everyone watching knows how to do so, you just walk past them. I know, crazy. However, the interesting part is that there is no information on the rarity of these two, so I ran a little testing on both and this is what I found. So as we all know, squiddles can only spawn when the lights in a room are either turned off or get shattered as a node monster passes through. They can spawn anywhere in a room as long as they're on the ground. Now, I don't know the exact chance of a squiddle spawning in a dark room, but I'd assume it's around 30 to 50%. Again, I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, and depending on the length of the room, up to 3 squiddles can spawn. And for the puddles of void mass, I'd assume the odds of one spawning is 10 to 20%. Which may seem little, but you gotta remember that there could be a lot of lockers in a room. Anyways, those were the most common monsters. On to the next ones. The next monsters are Infestation and Good People. Both of these are slightly rarer than the previous ones I've mentioned, but they're still pretty common. I'll begin by talking about Infestation. This monster can only spawn in rooms that have big windows that lead into the open water, unless they have underwater mines, of course. If they don't have them, however, then Infestation has a pretty good chance of appearing. Now, again, I have no idea what the chances are, but I'd assume it's around 40 to 50%. Unless you get a gauntlet, then it's 100%. Shocker. Now, if you get unlucky and you get the Trench's room generation, then Infestation will be spawning way more frequently since every room has see-through windows all over it. Now on to Good People. These guys can only spawn if, you guessed it, there's fake doors. Now, what is the chance of a room with fake doors to spawn? Well, there are a lot of room types that could contain fake doors, so I'm assuming the chance of one replacing a blocked/ruined door with a fake door is around 30%. However, there's another way I figured it might work. The more rooms you enter that don't have fake doors, the higher the chance of one actually appearing when you enter the next one. This will be pretty important later on, so stick around. Anyways, both Infestation and Good People are still pretty common, and you'll see them around pretty often. And now for the main monsters, aka the node monsters, or angler variants. The way their spawn rate works is extremely similar to how Good People works. Each angler has a chance to spawn when the lights flicker. Obviously, the most common variant is angler, but the rarest ones are Blitz and Chainsmoker. Now, it gets pretty interesting when you realize how they all work. Every angler variant runs on a timer called the node timer. This is an invisible timer that when reaching 0 will flicker the lights and spawn a random angler variant, excluding Pinky because the lights don't flicker when she comes. After the monster has passed, the timer will reset back to a specific number. I have no idea what that number is. And when the timer reaches 0 again, it will spawn another monster. Now, the way this timer works is every time you open a door, it cuts off a certain amount of seconds off the timer, meaning the more doors you open, the faster it takes for the timer to reach 0. So for instance, let's say the timer starts at exactly 1 minute. Again, I do not know if that's actually what it starts at. If you open a door, the timer will be set back by, let's say, 10 seconds. Again, I have no idea if that's accurate. Then the timer will end up at 50 seconds. And when you open another door, it cuts off another 10 seconds. So the timer will now be set on 40 seconds. And then the cycle continues until it reaches 0 again. That's basically the simplest way I can explain what the node timer is. That's what all the angler variants operate on. Now, the rarity of each angler variant also changes the more doors you open. Let's say, for instance, Chainsmoker's chance of spawning is 5%. You open a door and the lights flicker, but Chainsmoker didn't spawn. Chainsmoker's original chance of spawning goes up by, let's say, 5%, so now he's at 10%. Then the cycle continues on and on until he actually ends up spawning. And when he does spawn, his spawn rate goes back to its original chance. In our case, it's 5%. That's how they all work. The only difference is each variant is rarer than the other. Now, I'm way too lazy to actually go in game and narrow down each variant's rarity, so I just comprised the list of the most common variants to the rarest variants along with their alleged spawn rate. Pause if you want to read them, but yeah, that's basically how they all work. Wow, that was a lot of explaining. On to the next monsters. Alright, now we're getting into the actual somewhat rare monsters like Wall Dweller and the Trench Bleeder. Now, I know the Trench Bleeder isn't a monster, but the wiki says it is, so it's a monster. Now, getting the room that leads into the trench bleeder area is surprisingly rare considering the fact that the trench bleeder is very important to the ending of the game where it stomps on one of the searchlights. Me personally, I would make it so that getting that room is guaranteed so we get a proper introduction to the trench bleeders and how they work, but you know, that's just me, so. The trench bleeder room can spawn anywhere from room 70 to room 90, and I'd assume with each door open in that area, you'll have about a 5% chance of getting the trench bleeder room. And for the wall dwellers, I'd take the same logic with the node timer and say that every door you open gradually increases the chances of a wall dweller spawning, possibly starting at 1% and going up by another 1% for every door being opened, resetting when he spawns. And now, the monster a lot of you have been probably waiting for. Minigames! Woohoo! Pandemonium also works similarly to all the angler variants despite not being an angler variant. I'd assume he's slightly rarer than Blitz, being able to spawn from 1%, and every time you open a door his chance increases by another 1%, just like a wall dweller. All of the monsters that I just mentioned pale in comparison to the next monsters I'm going to talk about. Now we're about to get into the rarest monsters in this game. Before we get to the rarest monsters, I want to give an honorable mention to Mirage, Stan, and Styx. I wouldn't really consider them monsters, but they are extremely rare. Both Mirage and Styx can kill you as they're meant to be joke monsters. Mirage is an extremely rare quote-unquote monster that takes on the appearance of a white mist. It flies right by you without actually doing anything to you. It emits the same sound as Angler does, but it's muffled, so it essentially pranks you into thinking that Angler is coming, when in reality it's just a white cloud. Styx is also supposed to be a joke monster. According to the wiki, getting jump scared by him is 1 in 2,000, which is very rare. But again, when he does jump scare you, it does absolutely nothing other than destroy your eardrums. Out of all of them, Stan is the rarest. And my entire time of playing Pressure, I never encountered him once. Not a single time. He only spawns in the identity fraud room, which is extremely rare. How rare, you might ask? Well, I have no idea. There's no information about it, and there's basically no way for me to narrow down the rarity of it, so just know that it's extremely rare. Alright, now it's actually time to talk about the rarest monsters. Yes. How could I forget about A60, or the multi-monster as the game likes to call him. This guy is rare. Like, really rare. This is where things start to get interesting, because we do actually have knowledge on how rare he is. According to the wiki, he either has a 1% chance to spawn or a 0.2% chance to spawn. What? Make up your mind, is it 1% or 0.2%? Now, I'm not exactly sure on whether this dude operates like all of the angler variants where the more doors you open, the higher the chance of him actually spawning is. But I do honestly think this dude's spawn rate is always set on a certain percentage and it won't go up the more doors you open. It just stays the same until he actually spawns. Now, as for his rarity, I highly doubt it's 1%. That just seems way too common, and I would have easily gotten him in my first playthroughs if that was actually the case. I'm pretty certain it's around 0.2% to around 0.5%, since that just seems way more reasonable. That is, of course, if his spawn rate stays the same. It could also be completely similar to the angler variants where the probability rises the more doors you open. Not to mention, we wouldn't even know how much percentage would be added to his total probability the more doors you open. That would just be too complicated, and my brain is already fried by calculating only one of those two scenarios. Anyways, just know that he's very rare, okay? And now we have the Death Angel. If you've never heard of this monster before, it's basically just Pandemonium, except he doesn't chase you when he sees you. In fact, he doesn't even have to see you to know where you are. He always knows where you are, and he will also chase you down until he either kills you or you get in a locker. And when you do get in a locker, you'll be forced to play his minigame, which is basically just Pandemonium's minigame, except he doesn't slam your locker like Pandemonium. He just stares at you until you eventually give up. Yeah, this minigame is infinite and it's impossible to beat. So I'd say the best option is just to speedrun the game as fast as possible and pray that somehow, someway, you reach the end just in time. Anyways, back to the main topic. He's a developer-only monster, meaning the only way to spawn him is to get a developer to spawn him in for you using admin commands. This could also be said about the Educator, or Baldi, as he's also a developer-only monster and he will also slowly chase you down, except he can actually kill you in lockers. And finally, we have the two most rare monsters in the game. Ambuscade and Runner? Look, if you're a sane person, you call them by their normal names, Rush and Ambush, and not Ambuscade and Runner. Anyways, let's start off by talking about Rush. This guy's interesting because he's not actually in the game. The only sightings we have of him are in the dev testing game, which was basically a place where you'd be able to playtest the game with the current new features added in the Friendly Fire update. Primarily death mode, obviously. There's barely any footage of this guy because of that reason, and slowly based on the fact that he's very rare. Like literally, I never encountered him while playing death mode, so there's no way for me to pinpoint exactly how rare he is. However, one of the people that encountered him stated that he spawned twice for them during testing. Now, I don't know if he means twice in the same run or twice in 2 playthroughs, but I don't know, man. I'm assuming he's slightly rarer than Pandemonium, being able to spawn at 1% on a set rate. There's really no other way for me to pinpoint his exact rarity here, so I'll just leave that undecided for now. Alright, now let's talk about Ambush. Or Ambuscade. This is another developer-only monster, so you'll pretty much never encounter him unless you have a developer in your game. There's only one singular sighting of this guy, and it's in a Pressure charity stream. The first thing I noticed when seeing him is that there's an orange glow around him. I was sort of confused as to why he has that, despite literally being green, but then I realized that he's literally just a Frogger reskin. The same can basically be said about Rush, as he's also a reskin of Angler. Yeah, both of these monsters are jokes for the most part. They're not really anything special. They don't serve any new mechanics like the Death Angel or Educator. As a bonus, I'll be including a monster called Lights Out. I don't really know what the point of this monster was, but it was basically an invisible monster that would cut off the lights every time it passes by. That's literally all it does. It doesn't kill the player, it doesn't jump scare them, it just cuts the lights off. There's only a singular piece of footage of it, and it's from the owner of the game. Yeah, that's all there is to it. Also, as a side note, this is what Pandemonium used to look like. He used to be called Rebound, and he would work very similarly to the current Pandemonium, except instead of having to see you to chase you, he just follows a set path without caring. Basically like all the other Angler variants. You either get in the locker and do his minigame, or you can just hide in plain sight and completely avoid him along with his minigame. That would have made lockerless runs a lot easier back then, honestly. Anyways, that's basically what I wanted to talk about today. Yeah, like and subscribe.